Welcome to Semiconductor News Decoded. I'm Ty, with 31 years inside the semiconductor industry, bringing you the real from the factory floor. Today's topic: how NVIDIA is positioning itself to capture the humanoid AI space, using gaming as its entry point. This is a story about where the next wave of AI chip demand is quietly being built. As always, I'll explain everything in the most simplified way possible. Even a middle schooler should be able to follow along. If you're a specialist watching, some parts may feel oversimplified, but I'd like to prioritize giving everyone the big picture first. Today's analogy involves a virtual driving simulator school and a taxi company. So sit back and enjoy. Here's how I'd frame today's news. Imagine a driving school that has spent years building up tens of thousands of hours of training data using a virtual driving simulator. The knowledge and expertise that school developed, it turned out that a taxi company could use it almost directly to train professional drivers. That's essentially what this story is about. The driving school's simulator recreates an enormous variety of real-world situations. Pedestrians suddenly stepping into the road, navigating a slippery intersection on a rainy night, merging lanes through heavy traffic. Students get to practice each of these scenarios thousands of times in a safe virtual environment before they ever sit behind the wheel of a real car. The idea is to build solid judgment before anyone hits the actual road. And what is it that a taxi company needs? Exactly that, the judgment to handle any situation safely and naturally out on public roads. The capabilities that the driving school had been developing inside a virtual space turned out to be almost identical to what taxi companies need in the real world. Two very different businesses, but they were essentially solving the same problem. The company that manufactures the simulator hardware noticed this overlap. They thought, we're already selling to driving schools, but we could sell to taxi company training centers too. And so they began moving into both markets at once, seeing an opportunity that nobody else had connected yet. A driving school and a taxi company look like completely separate businesses on the surface, but underneath, they share the same fundamental challenge. How do you develop the judgment and decision-making ability to handle real-world situations, all inside a virtual environment? That's the core question. From here, I'll explain how this analogy maps onto what's actually happening in the technology industry today. Let me summarize the driving simulator stance. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, traveled to South Korea and held meetings with some of the country's leading game companies: Krafton, Nexon Korea, Netmarble, and Smilegate. The stated focus of these conversations was AI and game development, generative AI, real-time rendering, AI-driven characters, and tools to support the development process. From the outside, it reads as a standard business development meeting around gaming. And honestly, my current position on this NVIDIA move is almost exactly the same as the driving simulator story. On the surface, these meetings look like gaming business expansion. But from where I sit, with 3 decades inside the semiconductor and AI industry, there's a much more significant signal buried in this news. That signal is this: the demand for AI GPUs, the high-performance computing chips designed for artificial intelligence workloads, is beginning to expand beyond data centers and into game development studios. Until now, the vast majority of AI GPU demand has come from cloud-based data centers. But as game studios begin deploying AI in serious ways across their pipelines, they could become an entirely new pillar of demand for chips like NVIDIA's. Here's where I'll share my own perspective. I don't think NVIDIA is engaging with game companies simply because it wants a bigger slice of the gaming market. Behind these moves, I believe there's a deliberate long-term strategy aimed squarely at the world of humanoid robots. Robots designed to operate alongside humans in the real world. If you've been following the news recently, you've probably noticed that major game companies have been setting up robotics subsidiaries. On the surface, that might seem like a strange pivot, but when you look at it closely, the logic is actually quite sound. What these game companies are after is not the robot's body, it's something much closer to the robot's brain. Game companies have spent decades creating characters that behave in believably human ways inside virtual worlds. Getting a character to walk naturally, to avoid obstacles fluidly, to make contextually appropriate decisions on the fly, these are deeply hard problems. And they are, at their core, almost exactly the same problems that a humanoid robot needs to solve in order to function in the real world. Here's what the robotics industry has come to understand. The hard part of humanoid robots is not the physical movement itself. The real challenge is intelligence, the ability to make natural, context-appropriate decisions inside a human environment, understanding the unspoken rules of how people move and interact. That social and situational intelligence is the single biggest wall standing between today's robots and genuinely useful ones. And that is precisely the domain that game companies have been refining for years. NVIDIA's role in all of this is becoming clear. NVIDIA is not a robot manufacturer. Instead, it is positioning itself as the provider of the training and simulation environment, the infrastructure where robots learn how to move, decide, and respond in the physical world before they ever leave the lab. Specifically, NVIDIA offers a platform called Isaac, a simulation framework built for robotics. It creates virtual environments where robots can train across an enormous variety of scenarios, much like a game engine creates virtual worlds for characters to inhabit. This is exactly where the techniques built up through decades of game development intersect with NVIDIA's GPU infrastructure. With that context in mind, the partnership with Korean game studios starts to make a great deal of sense. Korean game companies are among the world's most sophisticated developers of AI-driven characters and virtual behavior systems. If that expertise is brought onto NVIDIA's platform, it could meaningfully accelerate the development of the behavioral intelligence layer for humanoid AI, the part that makes robots feel natural and trustworthy in human spaces. From a semiconductor demand standpoint, this also matters enormously. Training AI for games and training AI for robots both require massive amounts of GPU compute. If NVIDIA can build a position at the center of both of those markets, it creates a structure where demand for its chips keeps growing across multiple fronts at once. Let me bring everything together. Jensen Huang visited South Korea and held meetings with the country's major game companies, deepening collaboration around AI and game development. On the surface, it's a story about gaming business growth, but from the semiconductor and AI industry perspective, it reads as a clear signal that AI GPU demand is expanding well beyond data centers. More importantly, the connection between game technology and humanoid robot AI is becoming impossible to ignore. The intelligence that game companies have spent years building, getting virtual characters to behave naturally and make smart decisions inside complex environments, is fundamentally the same intelligence that robots need to function in the real world. NVIDIA is not trying to build the robots themselves. Instead, it is positioning itself as the platform provider for how those robots learn, using game companies' deep expertise as a key ingredient in its own ecosystem. Here's the takeaway. The most important thing this news tells us is that the old assumption, gaming and robotics are completely separate industries, is quietly breaking down. The intelligence needed to make a virtual character move like a human and the intelligence needed to make a robot move naturally in a human society are two sides of the same coin. NVIDIA is using gaming's vast training ground to build the foundational infrastructure for humanoid AI, doing it steadily and without a lot of fanfare. If this trajectory accelerates, AI GPU demand will continue to grow across three distinct pillars: data centers, gaming, and robotics. And going forward, I expect the boundary between game companies and robot companies to become increasingly blurry. That's all for today. I'll keep bringing you semiconductor news and analysis, so if you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. This has been Ty on Semiconductor News Decoded.